there we go. You should be seeing it here in a minute.
Yeah.
And so what I'm going to be doing is I don't want to assume.
The award house.
No pun intended. I don't want to assume
Yeah,
that
I
all of
guess.
you are familiar with Zooming. So Marcy, if you can mute wherever that's coming from, thank you. While many of you are expert Zoomers, I don't want to assume anything. So I'm briefly going to go over kind of the basic features that are going to allow you to participate in this specific webinar. First one is obviously the microphone. Make sure you turn it off unless you're speaking. It causes a lot of background noise for the rest of the group. And then video. I encourage you to use your camera. It does help create a sense of community, but I also understand there may be bandwidth concerns around that. So do as you feel the most comfortable doing. And then when we look at chat features, anytime you have a question throughout the course of this afternoon here, feel free to put it into chat. I'm also going to provide you some time at the end, kind of the conclusion of this webinar, for a bit of a breakout room, and not only the breakout room, but larger discussions, Q&A sessions. So Marcy and Chris are monitoring chat currently, and they're able to respond to your questions. And then just to kind of make everybody familiar with each other, make sure we, many of you probably already recognize each other and where you're coming from. But underneath your name there, underneath participants, if you want to edit your name, click on the participants bar here. Give me a sec. On the participants bar, if you have on your name on that drop down bar on the far right, you select rename, and after your name, add the district you represent on today's call.
I have no idea how to do any of this stuff.
And if not, you can put it in chat too. And then just keep in mind also, for those of you who are putting those in there, that far right of your control bar on that Zoom, you should see a selection titled reactions, and you can use those throughout the webinar as you see fit. And I believe that sets us up to hit the ground running. And I'm going to start off with what the objective. What are we here for? I want it to be clearly stated. I always believe, just like any classroom, why are we here? What do you hope to get out of it? The session's going to outline the top 5 things you're going to need to know about Smarter Balance assessments. We're then going to transition to kind of a breakout room for peer-to-peer discussion. And finally conclude with bringing it back into a whole group conversation about topics, questions, concerns, comments that are addressed in those specific breakout rooms. So for this purposes here, I'm going to reiterate or start with addressing the top 5 things we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Keep in mind, they are not ranked in order of importance, but they are presented in a specific order kind of to help kind of with that overall flow of the conversation. And they're listed here being the value of data that we'll discuss for 2021, Montana specific shortened form test blueprint. Number 3 being a balanced system of assessments. Number 4, looking at interpreting data. And then number 5, I say this is what you need to know about Smarter Balance, but number 5 is really the catch-all for components that reach beyond Smarter Balance and address kind of the Montana Comprehensive Assessments, the MontCAS things as far as all assessments in the state. That is remote options, medical exemptions, and an update on the waiver process. So those are the 5 things we'll be addressing within that context. So starting with number 1, we'll begin with this first topic, obviously titled The Value of Data in 2021. So in looking at this and addressing the first component here, I want to start by addressing the challenges facing the collection of valid and reliable data as a direct result of the coronavirus. So the first challenge we obviously face in collecting any data is how to equitably do so, given the concerns around access for students who are in a remote learning environment. And assuming we have collected some data from statewide assessments, the second challenge becomes we must be cognizant of students who are not included in any of the data when interpreting reports. So how do we use the test scores from any large scale tests, and how that is done on a district, school, and an individual level kind of needs to be front and center of any conversation around testing itself. And then finally, you're talking about the capacity, which includes assessing remote learners being a logistical challenge due to access concerns and maintaining testing security in any kind of remote environment. So starting off, that's kind of the larger, it's a broad brush stroke of some of these challenges that we look at and face in 2021, this spring. This slide here looks at what's Montana's specific response to some of these challenges as I've listed them. And so the first response that we'll look at is Montana is seeking strategic waivers around testing, accountability, and reporting for 2021, which I think for many of you, that's probably not news. And the waivers are currently open for public comment and will be until January the 28th. Now, the OPI will be submitting strategic waiver requests around the first week of February, while the US Department of Education has 120 days to respond. And once the waiver is granted from the federal level, if it is, the Board of Public Education here at the state level must also approve the strategic waiver request. And so from our perspective, until these strategic waivers are granted from both the federal and the state level, the OPI is required by law to fulfill the obligations as outlined in administrative rules of Montana and the state's Montana ESSA plan. So in short, what that means is we're planning on testing students until we receive approval for any strategic waivers. So that's kind of looking at the number, addresses the number one, the first component there. The second component is in grades 3 through 8 math and ELA assessments, the general assessments, everybody knows them as the Smarter Balanced assessments. There will be a shortened blueprint. This blueprint will be a long-term shortened blueprint, not specific just to 2021. And I'll address that a little bit later. I'll revisit that a little bit. So that's the second response in Montana's specific response to the challenges of 2021. And then finally, the third one is the OPI is seeking to extend testing windows whenever it's possible to alleviate concerns around ensuring the greatest amount of participation and providing opportunity for these statewide assessments. Keep in mind that, some of these you're in a consortia, so it's a consortia decision rather than an individual decision for the states, so those are looking at you've seen the challenges, these are specific response, and you may ask, wait a minute, I thought first part was about the value of data. You really haven't talked about the value of data. And what I've tried to do is set it up in addressing the challenges in the response and then addressing, despite all of that, when we look at it, what is the value of data? And specifically, given all the challenges around testing this spring, it is important to note that any data collected is going to help everyone see the opportunity differences across student groups and schools. And then the value of this data is that we can begin to quantify the impacts of the pandemic and identify areas of need. And I want to note on the bottom far right corner of this slide, which is pulled from an article titled Restart and Recovery, the Alternative Approaches to State Testing in 2021. This is an article that has recently been published by the National Advisory Group to the Council of Chief State School Officers, otherwise the acronym known as CCSSO. And this quote expresses the importance of data given the unique challenges that faced by schools this past year. And I'll just read it very quickly here. Even if test data is not available, collecting opportunity to learn data could provide those important insights with regard to allocating future resources to schools and students most in need of support. So that being one of the things around the context, kind of contextually situate us in what we're talking about. There's, like I said, there's a lot happening in the assessment world with spring 2021. So we'll jump with that to the Montana specific shortened form test blueprint. Now, jumping to this second component I'm going to start off with, in conjunction with the test blueprint, which will take less testing time for students, it's important to kind of look at the testing times and behaviors of Montana students before the blueprint change. So when was the last year we would have had this? It would have been 2019, the spring of 19. The data displayed here on the screen for you is 2019, which was the last year Montana students engaged with that Smarter Balance, what's considered the full form traditional assessment blueprint. And note that there are two sets of averages for these testing times, and that average testing time, and then there's the 80th percentile. I do want to point out that the 80th percentile is often the more accurate number because the average tends to be skewed by students who click through that statewide assessments in only a few minutes. So state one here are the average testing times for all of the states within that Smarter Balance consortia, while Montana's testing times are listed in that right-hand column. And if you look at this graph, kind of the big takeaway from this chart is that Montana students typically take less time completing the statewide math and ELA assessment than their peers in member states. And this next slide here is very similar to the previous slide, with the exception that it covers the math test taking times instead of the ELA. And again, you're going to see the same trend in this chart that you saw in the previous one, and that Montana students traditionally take less time to complete the statewide assessments in math and ELA than their peers in other member states. And in this, I want to be specific. This is specific to the general math ELA, i.e. the Smarter Balanced assessments. And then this chart here shows Montana students testing behavior using the full form blueprint for the math and ELA grades 3 through 8 in 2019. And this study looks at the number of pauses during, and this is just pulled from an ELA. The math portion is very similar to this, but this is from an ELA portion of the assessment, which ELA typically has taken the longest because of the performance task that's included in there. So state one is, again, same deal as the average for all the consortium member states. And this consortia average shows that between 5 and 18% of students did not pause at all throughout the ELA assessment, which, if you recall, is that longest portion of the suite of assessments. Meanwhile, the percentage of Montana students who did not pause at all through the ELA assessment was between 22 and 35%. And also note that the number of pauses, and this is right here, one or more pauses in the middle there, number of pauses as noted in the middle column you had. I'm taking a peek at that. And then I do want to just kind of conclude this slide with referencing a 2019 study that was conducted by Cavion for Montana, looking at statewide testing practices and behaviors. And some of the, what they came looking at was some of this, the pausing. And their conclusion was best practices encourage students to pause during testing to reduce testing fatigue and increase the reliability and the validity of scores. So that kind of that's kind of the preloading at looking before we jump into the shortened blueprint. What exactly is it? Now, the details at this point in time, since it is not finalized, is what I can tell you is when you look at the Montana blueprint, is the full form traditional previous test, that includes both testing times for ELA and math. This would have been probably it would have been safe to say this is the 80th percentile rather than the average time. Traditionally, as you're looking at 5 to 6 hours in completing it. And with this Montana specific short form, i.e. that new blueprint, you're going to be looking at a total of 3 to 4 hours of total testing time, including math and ELA. And the specifics of the blueprint, once finalized, I'll share all of that with you guys. We'll make sure we share that with you. So that's at this point, that's the second, when you go down list top 5 things, that's the second. And then the third one ties in directly to number two. Number 2 and 3 kind of flow together, is looking at the third thing here, obviously, to know about smarter balanced assessments is this increased importance of having a balanced assessment within a district. And in light, I know this is a lot of text for a slide and I warred with it, but I thought, so bear with me here and I'll just try to get the information out so we can set the stage to walk through what the number 3 component is. But in light of the new Montana specific test blueprint this year, let's look at the purpose of a statewide assessment, right? And one way you can view a statewide assessment is to see it like an annual physical that's used to measure, to ensure Montana's commitment to providing a high quality and equitable education to all students. So note that the statewide summative assessment should also be viewed, and we've said this quite a bit, as one of the multiple data points to measure growth. So the Montana specific shortened blueprint, which I've just addressed in number 2, shifts some of the focus away from that statewide summative assessment onto the value of a district-wide balanced system of assessments, which also ensures that the curricular and instructional decisions remain in the hands of those who know individual students' needs the best, which is teachers and instructional coaches. So when we're talking about the importance of a balanced system of assessment, what exactly does that mean? We throw the term around a lot, but these next few slides are designed to provide a model of what a balanced assessment system can look like using the tools currently available to educators in math and ELA, grades 3 through 8. And a solid place to start of any place is defining terms. And in this case, the term standards, instruction, assessment, which are embedded within any dialogue around using term balanced assessment. So standards are a reference to the Montana Board of Public Education, i.e. the board approved Montana content standards. And they clearly define what students should know and be able to do at the end of every grade level in order to be college and career ready. So then when we talk about instruction, that can be defined as the strategies or resources that are used to make sure those individual students progress towards the Montana content standards. And then finally, when we talk about the assessment, it's a term given to any activity that basically involves gathering and evaluating information about the effectiveness of an instructional program. As it relates to student learning. And assessments range from formative assessment practices that every teacher has always done. That can be an exit slip, an entrance ticket in the classroom, to the larger statewide summative assessments students take every year. So one of the 3 more terms I want to look at before we jump into this balanced assessment is system coherence and balance. And when we use the term system, it can be defined as a district or a school-wide process of making sure that the curriculum, the instruction, and the assessments are all tied together into a larger vision of student learning. And then when talking about multiple data points, the importance of understanding the term coherence cannot be overstated here, which is essentially just making sure that any assessments that are administered are aligned to, or here in this case, coherent with, the district's curriculum and instruction. And that is where the idea that multiple data points come from, making sure that all those data points are measuring the same thing, i.e. the Montana content standards. And finally, this last term we use is balance. It's defined as having various assessment types available to meet the purposes and needs of the district at that time. And it is not a focus on equal weighting of various types of assessments, but rather a focus on having a series of assessments available to use at the time when they are needed. So that's I know there's 6 terms, but when you look at balanced assessments, it's critical to understand that. And so this graphic maybe displays better what I've been trying to say. For those visual learners, it should. The focus being on the individual student, making sure that those schools and districts have the resources and data to support teaching and learning. Goal is to prepare all students to graduate high school, college, and career ready. Best way to make sure that we can do that is to teach you the Montana content standards. And then you have balanced tools available for educators to be able to focus their teaching on student needs, including formative assessments, which are that granular classroom level practices that happen on an everyday level and often are intuitive to a classroom teacher. And then you have interim or benchmark assessments that are conducted periodically on that district level where feedback is immediate, actionable feedback. And then finally, you have the summative assessments at that end of year, kind of that physical, if you will, that looks at more of a systems measurement. And another way to look at what I've talked about is a district-wide balance assessment system. Maybe take a peek at this roadmap graphic. This focuses, it's essentially saying the same thing with different graphics. Focuses on the instructional cycle, how balanced assessments fit within this framework. So if you include summatives, you add interims and formative practices, what you end up with is a balanced assessment within the larger instructional cycle. And so one of the things I'm excited about when you look at this shortened blueprint, it really focuses, it really emphasizes this balanced assessment approach, that an assessment, the summative, is not a thing. It is not something that is just done once a year just because, but it is rather a part of a process that improves student learning. And then finally, I know I've spent a lot of time in previous sessions talking about this, and we have at our upcoming Assist conference, we have entire sessions committed to talking about interims, so I'm just going to spend one slide on it. The tools that are currently available to educators for grades 3 through 8 and high school in math and ELA include 3 types of interim assessments that range from anywhere it takes them 2 hours to complete to 10 minutes. And with their immediate and actionable feedback, the interims make this now an integral piece of a coherent, balanced system of assessments. And the formative tools available to educators here, if you look on the right side of the screen, include the new Tools for Teachers site. And what is Tools for Teachers? It basically houses teacher-created lesson plans aligned to and searchable by the content standards. And we have probably, I'm going to say 20 Montana educators who are contributing to that Tools for Teachers. And then at the very bottom, something that just came out very recently is the new SMART site. It's called, you can see down at how it's spelled at the bottom, an emphasis capitalized ART on the art component. It is displaying annotated student writing. It's a website committed to annotated student writing for educators. And it shows student writing samples. It shows how they've been scored. They can be used for professional development by educators. They can be used in the classroom with students, however they want. But those are just broad brush strokes of an overview on the third component. Like I said, number 2 and 3 really tie together because with a shortened blueprint, this emphasizes this balanced approach. And then 4, we have interpreting data. And this is really important, looking at how we look at any 2021 data coming at us. And I do want to reiterate the score reports for math and ELA in grades 3 through 8, i.e. Smarter Balance, even with the shortened blueprint, it's going to remain the same with your claim and target level scores there to guide instructional practice for the following year. And also keep in mind the shortened blueprint score reports are going to remain comparable to historical math and ELA summative assessments. And looking at the individual student reports, for students who participate again in the Smarter Balance Math ELA statewide assessments, the districts, as we did last year, a lot of you may not remember this because we had the waiver coming in, but last year was the first year we had implemented the need. Instead of reports being sent out, they were to be printed at the district level. And then the individual student report will provide that overall score and a claim score. But because we're looking at a shortened blueprint target or a shortened blueprint, that target level data is not going to be available on the individual student report, which again, this is why I've been reiterating the importance of having that district-wide balance assessment system that can provide multiple data points for individual student throughout the course of the entire year. And then finally, looking at interpretations, another important consideration of any 2021 data is to try to have context around score reports. Context meaning individual student opportunities to learn, or OTL. If you hear the term OTL, it's a reference to opportunity to learn. So for example, how much time did the individual student engage in remote versus in-person learning this year? How accessible were learning materials for the student? Were the materials accessible as required by an IEP? How was internet access for that student? And then how can the district best relay this information to families and parents? And a starting point, how has the district done this traditionally? And given the challenges of this year, how can it best do that this year? So I raise these questions as they're all very important questions whose answers are obviously going to depend on the individual student and help offer some context around any interpretation of a score report. So that being the fourth component, I'm going to shift over and talk about the fifth and final thing to know about Smarter Balance in FY 2021, which, like I said earlier at the beginning, includes three topics that are not only relevant to Smarter Balance, but to that larger Montana Comprehensive Assessment System, MontCAS, if you will. And they include remote administration, medical exemptions, and updates to strategic waiver process. So I'm going to start with remote administration. And while this may seem like you're beating a dead horse, it's like, yeah, no remote administration, we get it. You don't have to explain it. I do feel like the reasons for it should be articulated here. Montana has opted to not have any remote testing administrations this spring for a number of reasons, including concern around the equity of remote learning environment, individual student access to technology, and then also privacy of the home when trying to maintain test security. So naturally, this leads to a follow-up question about how to test students who have been in a remote learning environment all year, where parents, families refuse to have the student participate in person. Which brings me to the next slide about medical exemptions. So the best person to respond to this question is going to be Marcy Fortner here, my peer and colleague. She's currently working on and making sure that the addition of COVID-19 medical exemption language is used within that MontCAS application. And I know it's undergoing work as we speak. And so instead of me trying to blunder around and provide you with any kind of an update on it, I'm going to turn to Marcy and give her the floor on this as far as providing you with an update.
Thanks, Dwayne. Hi, everybody. So the medical exemption, as you probably all are aware, is the only approved exemption for state testing in a normal year. So currently, that is participation is reported in the MontCAS application. System test coordinators are the users, the secure users, secure access users in that application. And the screen here is just the login screen for the MontCAS application. Currently, the non-participation screen is turned off while we're creating that COVID-related medical exemption. So we're creating the screen to include a COVID reason as an approved medical exemption. So we just want to make sure that's not really meant to be like a blanket exemption. It's going to be used in cases in which, for example, the school might be closed because of positive COVID case. So maybe the school closes the last couple of weeks of a test window. So not all of the all of your students are able to finish up their testing. Those might be students who would you would use that COVID-related medical exemption for, or perhaps you have a student who is actually in a high risk category for contracting COVID. That might be another example. So we will be sending out more information and guidance on the COVID medical exemption later this month, and hope to have that screen opened up and enabled with that additional COVID reason by the end of this month, first part of February.
Thank you, Marcy. And then next, what I'm going to do is provide you with an update on the strategic waiver process. Obviously, it is currently in the public comment period, will be so until January 28th. But in this context, I'm going to defer to our assessment unit director, Ashley McGrath, to provide you guys with any updates on this process at this time.
Thank you, Dwayne. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent. With this wind and all, I didn't want to assume that I'm coming through clear. Thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit. So this slide here has a screen capture of the survey itself and the information and the response that we're receiving from stakeholders. This will be really imperative to our overall success with this application. So if you are able to or haven't been able to click on this yet and could get your response to us by January 28th, we would greatly appreciate it. The largest cross-section that we can get of stakeholders and learn and understand what the conditions are out there right now as far as participation in these assessments and just some of the challenges is going to be really helpful again and beneficial to our overall application process. Right now, as far as looking at survey responses, we have around 30 that have been submitted so far. So again, the more response we can get, the more that is going to be beneficial to our overall effort. I also just wanted to give a plug for tomorrow's strategic waiver webinar. So during tomorrow, 3:30, same kind of time, we will be open again for you to provide public comment and participate in that process. We will share out where we're at with the survey and where we're at in general with the process, and then upcoming events that will be happening for the rest of January. And that is where we are at with the process. Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you, Ashley. And that brings us kind of to a bringing back to what we talked about this whole process. Top 5 things you have to know about Smarter Balance 2021. 1 being the value of data, 2 being that short and form test blueprint, 3 being a balanced system of assessments, 4 being conversations around interpreting data, and the 5th one being those larger MontCAS topics of remote options, medical exemptions, waivers. And I know you have been provided a ton of information. So I always refer to it as a bit like drinking from a fire hose. And the best way to learn is digest this information. So some of you are, you digest by talking. Some digest by listening. There's many different ways, but I do want to provide you with an opportunity to digest what has been presented here. And I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, 4 or 5 other people. And you're encouraged to raise at that point in there, raise any questions that you thought of during the webinar, or which of these top 5 things you're looking forward to implementing within your district. And go from there. And we'll, like I said, if you've never been to Zoom, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Once this is activated, there will be a screen that shows up, pops right up on your screen in front of you and says, you have been assigned to a breakout room, and you just click on accept and boop, you go. It's really that simple. And as far as coming back, will be the same component in that. And given time, I'm going to give you, 4 to 5 people, give everybody about a minute, little over a minute to speak and kind of go around in a circle and a horn there. Obviously, if you do not want to speak, there's no requirement here. You can forfeit your time. You don't feel like you have to speak. And That being said, I am going to turn to activate those Zoom breakout rooms, and you should see them come up on the screen here momentarily. Do we have everybody back?
I believe so, Dwayne, it looks like it.
Okay. So if you were like, if it was very similar to your experience in the breakout rooms, you just got started, right? You're in the middle of a conversation and it kicked you off. But at this point, what I want to do is provide you with an opportunity. If there is anything that was said within those within those breakout rooms, any shareable questions, insights, observations to share to the group as a whole, this is your time, and I'll give you some time here for anybody who wants to just jump in.
Dwayne, if I may, can I speak on behalf of my group?
You may, please do.
We had two questions in our group, and the first question was they were wondering what was shortened to reduce it down to 3 to 4 hours.
That's a great question. And like I said in my breakout room, I so very much wanted to tell you the exacts of this blueprint. We are literally within we're not very far away from finalizing the blueprint. Until it is finalized, I'm hesitant to share where we're at with this before it's finalized. So I expect this to be finalized very soon. And therefore, that explains the reason why I did give you broad brushstroke generalizations of the blueprint. Details are forthcoming once it has been finalized. So I know that's not a great answer, but it's a great insight. And I appreciate you pushing on that and wanting to know more, because I myself wanted to know the details of that. So Chantel, as I believe that answers the first question. Second question you have?
The other question is how will, they would like more guidance on how ELA and mathematics will be broken up over the test window. In the past, they've had guidance to know about how long math they should take for math and how long they should take for ELA. And they're curious, will new guidance come out with the new blueprint?
Again, the guidance will be contingent, very, very contingent upon the blueprint itself. And that guidance will be adjoining and alongside that blueprint. I do expect that to come out pretty soon. Like I don't expect it to be very long before we can reveal some of those details on what that looks like. But yes, we will have guidance, expectations for that. You know how I showed you that slide deck that shows the 80th percentile. Again, keep in mind, it is an 80th percentile. You have students below and above, but that 80th percentile time that you can expect to take for ELA and math under the new blueprint will be provided as well. And we'll provide that information to you guys alongside that blueprint.
Doing.
So just to keep in mind, one of the things kind of looking at you see, many of you see it, Ashley had commented there, the ASSIST conference, I do want to reiterate, I'm going to be presenting this very topic here, this very session at the ASSIST conference. And that this topic is going to be January 29th from 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And those details will be shared. I will be able to share those details at that time. And like I said, things are looking, we expect to be able to share that at that time. If you have anybody who has in your district who feel you would benefit from seeing this information or seeing this session, I encourage you to, put in a plug. It's a shameless plug and tell them, hey, come see this webinar on 5 things you got to know about Smarter. Any other questions, insights, comments?
Dwayne, I had that question I just put in the chat. Is there a projected time frame for the feds to respond to the OPI's request for waiver that came through a private chat?
Okay, that is a great question. And if you basically, I encourage you, if you have not attended a webinar, and I'm going to maybe call on Marcy and overload her with asking to put things in chat, but I believe there's one tomorrow afternoon. There is a webinar about the assessment waiver. I encourage you to go to it for public comment. But to answer your direct question.
Dwayne, this is Ashley. We also had that in our session. Do you want me to speak to that?
Yes, please do.
So this is an excellent question on time frame, and as everyone I think is well aware, as far as how quickly the department is likely to respond. So from a statutory standpoint, as we shared with you guys, they have the option to take up to 120 days to have a formal response. What we've seen historically in the change of administration is that some of these approvals and processes do get delayed. So we have that happening at the same time we will be making our application. So that's one of the reasons that the OPI decided to submit the application on February 5th, is to make sure that it went to the correct secretary. So the superintendent is doing an excellent job as far as communicating with the U.S. Department of Education about our intent, and has shared that with both the Secretary DeVos as well as the interim secretary, and will continue to make this communication known to the incoming secretary. And as far as actually giving you a kind of concrete date, that's difficult. As you guys know, we don't have a crystal ball and know what they will consider, but we're doing our best to cross all the T's and dot all the I's as far as the actual process itself is concerned. So there's as little back and forth between our office and the department as possible to also make it as swift for their decision-making process.
Thank you, Ashley. Any other group questions, insights? Thank you, Shelley. And I'm going to keep this option open. At the end, I will stay here, and actually the OPI assessment unit team will stay here. And if you have any further questions, we'll be able to answer those questions for you. And I'm going to jump in here to the next slide, giving in a plug for, many of you are aware of it, but I want to ensure that you're aware of our upcoming ASSIST conference, the annual assessment conference on January 28th, 29th. This is an annual conference for the assessment unit. It's going to be offered virtually this year. Registration closes on the 22nd of January. It's free to anybody who wants to attend. The registration link is, if somebody wants to put it in the chat in a few moments, it'll come through in the chat. We encourage you to attend this conference. And like I had mentioned, this specific conference, the 5 things, is going to be presented on the afternoon of the 29th. If you know of anyone who would benefit from attending a repetition, encourage you to invite me to join me on the 29th from 2 to 3. Otherwise, if you've attended this, encourage you to jump into another session at that time. And that kind of concludes where we're at. I do want to thank you for attending this January MontCAS webinar. There's a lot going on, and we'll try to keep you kind of abreast of events as they come in. And I am going to conclude with a slide, kind of a reference list slide. And we will all be here to answer any remaining questions you may have. And at this point, if you do not have questions, feel free to sign off. If you want to just hang around and listen to any questions that may be coming in, feel free to stick around. Marcy, you had listed a question. Would an abbreviated test satisfy the accountability requirements?
That came in a private chat.
Okay, so I'm going to, Ashley, do you want to take this?
You repeat the question, sorry, Dwayne.
The question that came in through chat is, would this abbreviated test, i.e. the Smarter Balance shortened form, satisfy the accountability requirements?
That's a great question. So the decision for a shortened assessment is not being made in isolation from our friends in the accountability group. And so they're aware of the details here. As far as maintaining growth projections and trend and those pieces, we're doing our best to preserve all of that as we move forward. There are definitely more conversations to be had. Again, another plug for tomorrow's session, because there are 3 things that we know with every waiver like this has. And we're seeing that right now through the current addendum process, and how that has implications potentially to the larger amendment process. And so these are all things under review that we are working out with our partners across the hall to make sure that we have addressed and that we have a plan in place to make sure that everything going forward is meaningful and doing its best to preserve our existing trend and growth needs.
Thank you, Ashley. And at this point, I am going to stop the recording.